Troy Donahue made America believe in perfect love. But his real loves, they had to stay hidden in the shadows. Troy Donahue, the golden boy of 1960s Hollywood, admired by millions, desired by women everywhere, lived a glamorous life on the surface, but behind closed doors, he harbored secrets that could destroy him overnight. In this video, we explore the forbidden love affairs that Troy Donahue never dared to admit until now. Troy Donahue. The name alone drove teenage girls crazy. With his golden hair, blue eyes, and jawline, he was the quintessential leading man of the late 1950s and early 1960s. On screen, he was the prince of young love, the kind of guy who could make hearts flutter with just a look. His breakthrough role in A Summer Place, 1959, made him a cultural phenomenon, cementing his image as the American Idol of impeccably groomed, handsome men. Posters of Troy were plastered on bedroom walls across the country, and magazines hailed him as Hollywood's blonde Adonis. To the world, he symbolized innocence, charm, and the promise of eternal youth. But that's only half the story. Behind the spotlight, behind the elaborate promotional photos and studio-arranged dates with glamorous stars, Troy Donahue carries a secret so dangerous that it could end it all. He lives in an era when Hollywood controls the narrative. The studios decide who you date, where you go, and even what rumors are allowed to circulate. In those years, the slightest hint of homosexuality was not only scandalous, but career-destroying. And Troy, despite being the epitome of straight love, finds himself drawn into relationships that no studio executive would approve of. Hollywood's golden boy is, in fact, living a double life. Troy Donahue, the charming boy every girl desires, has secretly dated some of the most famous men in Hollywood. Among his secret lovers were not only promising young women or obscure faces in the crowd, but also stars. Stars whose names were whispered in every family, whose reputations meant everything. For Troy, these relationships were tender, thrilling, and profound. But they were also dangerous. Every stolen kiss, every night spent in secret, carried the risk of being exposed. A single newspaper article could destroy him and the men he loved. To understand the extent of Troy's secrecy, you have to understand the world he lived in. Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s was a place of grand debuts and endless fantasy. The public witnessed a dreamland where actors became gods and actresses became invulnerable icons. But behind the glamour was control, fear, and silence. Actors were often forced into arranged relationships, lavender marriages, to hide their true desires. The studio system operated like a well-oiled machine, controlling gossip, bribing reporters, and creating the perfect image for every star. Anyone who crossed the line was punished. Sometimes it meant careers were ruined, sometimes reputations were ruined. Troy Donahue knew this. He knew that being discovered as gay or even suspected would erase everything he had built. And yet he couldn't help falling in love. For Troy, secret relationships weren't about scandal or rebellion. They were about connection. He craved intimacy in a world where everything seemed staged, where every smile on the red carpet was rehearsed. With men, he could let his guard down. He could be more than just the pretty boy Hollywood advertised him to be. He could be a person. And in the shadows of Beverly Hills parties, on private getaways to the California coast, in apartments hidden from the eyes of photographers, Troy built a private life that few people knew about. He wasn't alone in this. Many of Hollywood's top actors carried similar secrets. Rock Hudson, one of the most admired actors of his time, lived his entire life under the weight of a false heterosexual image. Tab Hunter, another teen idol, faced similar pressures and later revealed how the studios controlled his personal life to hide the truth. For Troy, the men he loved were more than companions. They were prisoners of the same system. Men who understood the price of being true to oneself in a world that demanded masks. And the question remains, the one we asked at the beginning. Who were they? Who were the stars Troy Donahue secretly loved? The ones he could never name in public. The answer is a story of secret encounters, whispered confessions, and forbidden love affairs that took place under the glittering glare of Hollywood's golden age. It's the story of a man hailed as the embodiment of the perfect heterosexual dream, who in reality became a symbol of something much more complicated. A man who dared to love in an age when love itself was forbidden. This is the untold story of Troy Donahue, not just the blonde idol of a summer place, but the man who risked it all for a dark passion. Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s was a machine, a glamorous dream factory built on strict contracts, tight controls, and an obsession with appearance. To audiences, it was an era of red carpets, flashing lights, and movie stars with faces that looked like they were carved from marble. But behind the glittering illusion was a darker reality. The studio system controlled not just movies, but lives. Every smile, every romance, every photo that appeared in Life magazine or the gossip columns was carefully scripted. Stars didn't own their stories, the studios did. If you were young, handsome, and on the rise like Troy Donahue, you weren't just dating. Your relationships were arranged, designed to protect the image the studios wanted to promote. Publicists arranged dinners with actresses, reporters were warned about chance encounters, and photographs were staged to look natural. The reality was often far from what was reported in the papers. If rumors about someone's sexuality arose, studios would act quickly, pairing the actor with a beautiful co-star in an open romance. These weren't relationships, they were contracts, masks designed to hide the truth. And the truth was dangerous. In mid-20th century America, homosexuality was not just taboo, it was criminal. Being exposed meant not only the loss of a career, but social ostracism, even arrest. In Hollywood, where an actor's livelihood depended on selling his image to millions of fans, the stakes were even higher. One whisper, one misplaced photo can ruin years of work. For Troy Donahue, trained to be the boy-next-door heartthrob, the stakes couldn't be higher. His studio wanted an American Prince Charming, not a man caught in a forbidden love affair. So he played the part. On screen, Troy was the perfect romantic lead. In real life, he smiled for the camera with the actresses beside him, posing for glossy photos that showed him as the dream boyfriend every girl wanted. But behind closed doors, his reality was very different. He was a man hungry for connection, a man drawn to people who, like him, lived behind a mask. Every night was a tension. The world saw innocence, but the truth was secret. Troy was not alone in this struggle. Rock Hudson, one of the biggest stars of his time, lived under a similarly oppressive spotlight. Handsome, masculine, adored by women around the world, Hudson was carefully packaged as a true leading man. But those who knew him understood the burden he carried, a constant fear of exposure. Tab Hunter, another blonde icon, endured similar pressures. When rumors of his sexuality surfaced, his studio scrambled to cover them up, arranging romances with famous women and sensationalizing the story to bury the truth. Troy Donahue belongs to this secret society. Men caught between who they are and the Hollywood image they want. Their stories are whispered in quiet bars, hidden in dark apartments, passed over secret glances at industry parties. They know each other's secrets, but they also know the stakes. If one falls, they all fall. And so they build a culture of silence, layers upon layers of masks. The tragedy is that these men gave the world performances of passion, longing, and fire, but their true passions were repressed. Audiences marveled at Troy's romantic intensity, not realizing that much of it came from a wellspring of emotion he could not freely express. The man who made millions believe in love on screen was denied the freedom to love openly in real life. This is the paradox of the golden age. The brighter the lights on Hollywood Boulevard, the deeper the shadows that stretch behind them. And into those shadows walked Troy Donahue, Hollywood's blonde prince, the silver screen's eternal romantic, but also a man burdened with secrets, tied to staged love affairs, haunted by silent nights. Every laugh at a premiere contained an unspoken truth. Every hug captured by the cameras contained a yearning for someone he could never reveal. Which makes us wonder, how much of Troy's charisma, vulnerability, and celebrity were shaped not just by the studio's hand, but by the quiet tension of living two lives at once? Was the golden image that America admired born in part of survival itself? So when we look back, perhaps we should see more than a face on the poster. We should see a man with invisible scars. We should remember the nights he walked into crowded rooms with a smile on his face, knowing the price of letting it slip. We should feel the weight of the fear, the loneliness, the silent battles behind those blue eyes. And you, what stirs inside you when you hear about this mysterious chapter of Hollywood? Do you see Troy Donahue as just another idol trapped in a fantasy, or a man who quietly dared to love against all odds? Tell us, where are you watching tonight? From what country? What corner of the world? Will you join us in peeling back the golden mask of old Hollywood? If the Hollywood studio system was a cage, Troy Donahue's first loves were the soaring birds he tried to keep locked away in his chest. The pressure was immense, the risks unbearable. But even in the darkest corners of that golden age, love found its way in. And for Troy, the first sparks of desire from the glamorous actresses who graced the covers of magazines, but from young men who, like him, carried secrets too heavy to tell. One of the first was Tab Hunter. Tall, blonde, and impossibly handsome, Tab was cut from the same mold as Troy. Dreamy eyes, square jaw, the kind of face that made teenage girls swoon. Both were marketed as the perfect boyfriend, the perfect future husband, the man every American family wanted their daughter to marry. Yet beneath the smiles and the flashy photos, they were kindred spirits, trapped in a shell, coerced into dating women by studios trying to quell rumors. For Troy and Tab, the connection was almost immediate. They understood each other's silences. They understood the wariness of living two lives, one for the camera, one for the heart. Their meetings were always cautious, discreet, hidden under the layers of lies the industry had forced upon them. A fishing trip was just an excuse to spend a weekend away. A late-night script meeting ended not with dialogue but with whispered confessions. Sometimes it was simpler. A drive along the coast, windows down, the roar of the waves drowning out the sound of fear. A rented beach house, lights dim, curtains drawn. There, for a few hours, they could escape. Troy would lie on the sand beside Tab, the cool Pacific breeze in his hair, the gentle sound of the waves in the background. They would laugh at the absurdity of the industry, the farcical interviews, the staged affairs, the way magazines described their dates, with women who were nothing more than colleagues or friends. In those moments, the mask would slip. They weren't idols or studio property. They were simply two young men, feeling the pull of forbidden love. But even then, fear never fully left the room. Every touch carried risk. Every kiss felt both exhilarating and dangerous. One wrong move, one photograph in the wrong hands, and everything could collapse. The danger was part of the thrill, yes, but also the shadow that never let go. Love in those days was always tinged with paranoia. The irony was almost cruel. By day, Troy was photographed hand-in-hand with glamorous actresses, escorted to premieres in perfectly staged appearances. Flashbulbs exploded, capturing him as the flawless romantic hero. Reporters gushed over his chemistry with leading ladies, and studio executives grinned as the headlines sold the fantasy. But when the lights faded, when the tuxedo was hung up in the closet, Troy's real heart came alive elsewhere. In the silence of a friend's apartment, in the shadows of Malibu's empty beaches, in stolen hours when he and Tab could finally drop the act. For Troy, these first loves were intoxicating not just because of passion, but because of freedom. The fleeting taste of what it felt like to live honestly, even if only for a night. Yet they were also heartbreaking, for he knew such freedom could never last. Tab Hunter, like Troy, lived under the same suffocating rules. Both were forced back, again and again, into the arms of actresses chosen for them by publicists. Both knew that their careers, still rising, still fragile, would not survive even the whisper of scandal. And so their romance flickered in fragments, never allowed to become whole. A night here, a weekend there. Glimpses of love swallowed by silence. The tenderness they shared was real, but the world they lived in demanded it stay invisible. Looking back, those early relationships were less about permanence and more about survival. They gave Troy something to hold on to in a life that often felt staged from beginning to end. They reminded him that beneath the polished image, beneath the headlines, he was still a man capable of love, of longing, of vulnerability. And yet this vulnerability carried a price. Every time Troy walked into a premiere with an actress on his arm, every time he smiled for the cameras, he carried the ache of a secret he could not share. The boyish charm that audiences adored was fueled in part by that ache, the longing of a man who lived in two worlds at once. These first hidden romances, fragile, stolen, fleeting, shaped him. They set the pattern for a lifetime of secret loves. They were his education in the paradox of Hollywood. The brighter the lights, the darker the shadows. And in those shadows, Troy Donahue's heart beat not for the women America thought he adored, but for the men who understood his silence. So when you see those old photographs, Troy with his golden hair, his sparkling eyes, his arm draped around a starlet at some glittering premiere, remember this: somewhere away from the flashbulbs, his heart was whispering to someone else. Hollywood's golden boy was not alone in these shadows. Troy Donahue's secret lovers were not obscure faces, but some of the biggest stars of the day. Men who, like him, lived under perfect facades while hiding a truth that could end their careers. These were not fleeting affairs, but dangerous affairs, whispered into the night, held like a flame in trembling hands. Each story was different, each unforgettable. Rock Hudson. To the public, Rock was a true leading man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile like Mount Rushmore itself. He was admired by women, envied by men, a perfect creation of the studio. But Troy saw what others did not: the fear in Rock's eyes, the weariness of living a double life. They met at a Hollywood party, champagne glasses clinking, cameras flashing. To everyone else, they were just two actors laughing in a crowded room. But that night, on a balcony overlooking Los Angeles, they found themselves alone. Words became whispers, and whispers became something more. Their love was short-lived, too short. Rock lived in constant fear of exposure, more than anyone else. The studio watched him closely, arranging countless dates with glamorous actresses to satisfy the tabloids. Troy yearned for freedom, but Rock lived behind walls. Their time together was tender, squeezed between filming schedules and on-set appearances, but it always felt like something that could never happen. In the end, fear won. Rock left, leaving Troy with memories of a love that was brilliant but never quite able to ignite. The most complicated of all was Anthony Perkins. To the world, Perkins was the man who terrified audiences in Psycho, the actor with the haunting face and the cold performance. But behind that screen persona was a man as conflicted as Troy himself. They met on a film set, sparks of recognition almost immediately. Their love was intense, passionate, but also stormy. Perkins struggled deeply with his identity, hiding the truth from even those closest to him. Troy, still young but already scarred by secret scars, knew all too well. Together, they formed a bond that was both captivating and devastating. Their nights were filled with longing and fire, but also silence and withdrawal. Perkins would lean in, then pull away, afraid of what might happen. For Troy, it was a roller coaster of devotion and heartbreak. In the end, neither could bear the constant weight of fear. Their love was shattered, leaving only the memory of what might have been. And then, the whispers. Names echoed through Hollywood, rumors resurfaced in memoirs and biographies. One of them was Marlon Brando. The mere idea was shocking. Brando, the rebel god of American cinema, the man who redefined acting, had whispered that they had spent forbidden nights of passion with Troy Donahue. Did it really happen? The evidence was shaky, the accounts conflicting, but the rumors refused to die down. Imagine the scene, a dusty Hollywood fundraiser, Brando in a leather jacket, Troy in a tailored suit, two charismas colliding in the crowd. Their personalities were both strong and unyielding. Brando unpredictable, fiery, unbridled, Troy disciplined, elegant, gallant. If they were together, it would not have been smooth. It would have been a storm, a clash of desires that burned but quickly burned themselves out. Some say they fought as much as they touched, that passion and conflict were inseparable. Whether the story is fact or legend, it remains one of the most controversial possibilities in Troy's mysterious history. Whether the story is fact or legend, it remains one of the most controversial possibilities in Troy's mysterious history. These secret love affairs are more than romances. They are mirrors. Each man reflects back to Troy what he cannot show the world. Rock Hudson shows him the weight of his fears. Anthony Perkins embodies the chaos of desire fighting against repression. And Brando, whether myth or memory, represents the fire, the rebellion, the danger of living without rules. None of these accounts are confirmed, but rumors from the golden age of Hollywood often linked Troy Donahue to these names. Biographers have never been able to substantiate these relationships, but the whispers have added to the mystery of his image. But in every case, the ending is the same. Silence, separation, return to the mask that Hollywood demands. For Troy Donahue, love is fleeting, fragile, and lived in the shadows. On screen, he is the eternal romantic, the golden boy of the American dream. Off-screen, he is a man who has learned that even the most beautiful love stories sometimes cannot overcome the weight of secrets. By the 1970s, the glamour that had once dominated Troy Donahue had begun to fade. The youthful face that had graced movie posters was no longer in demand. A new Hollywood was emerging. Rough, rugged, rebellious, and the studios no longer needed a blonde prince to symbolize yesterday's innocence. Roles were scarce, paychecks were tight, and Troy found himself drifting away from the center of the Hollywood universe, sinking into its shadow. The decline was not just professional, it was deeply personal. For years, Troy had led two lives. On screen, he was the romantic idol, the man every woman dreamed of. Off-screen, he was a man with secrets so heavy they were mentally draining. The constant need to hide, to smile when he wanted to cry, to pose for women when his heart was elsewhere, was wearing him down. What the studios once called image protection was actually a prison. And like many people living under unbearable pressure, Troy sought escape. Alcohol became his refuge. The peaceful drink after a long day turned into bottles of wine that darkened the night. Friends whispered about his struggles, about the times he showed up on set looking distracted or unsettled. Hollywood, ruthless and uncaring, had turned its back. By the mid-70s, he was no longer the star of beach romances or dreamy romantic movies. He was a man battling his demons in silence. Financial trouble followed. His peak fortune quickly evaporated, consumed by mismanagement, bad choices, and the instability that comes with a life of constant change. Troy Donahue, once the blonde prince of Hollywood, was suddenly penniless, drifting between supporting roles and oddball roles, his reputation reduced to a footnote in an industry that once worshipped him. But perhaps the deepest wound was not the loss of fame or fortune, but the loneliness. The secret loves of his youth, the tender nights with Tab Hunter, the intense passion for Anthony Perkins, the fleeting freedom with Rock Hudson, still lay deep in his heart. They were memories that brought both comfort and pain. Comfort because they reminded him that he had loved deeply. Pain because he could never name them out loud, never acknowledge them in public, never honor them in the light of day. Years later, Troy himself acknowledged the damage it caused. In an interview reflecting on the masks he was forced to wear, he confessed, "I lived a life of being lost, of hiding, of playing roles that the studios had written for me. And in the end, I didn't even know who I really was." His words carried the weight of decades of silence, of a man who had spent his youth in an industry that demanded perfection but punished authenticity. The memories of those secret loves never left him. Sometimes, late at night, friends would recall his words in fragments. Never names, never details, but feelings. He remembered the sound of waves as he held someone's hand on a dark beach. He remembered laughter over shared meals, hidden in an apartment with the curtains drawn. He missed the warmth of a body beside him, the fleeting belief that maybe, just maybe, he could live honestly, if only for one night. But those memories were both sweet and bitter. They gave him life in the present and grief in the years that followed. With every kiss he cherished, there was the pain of silence. With every secret love, there was the fear that history would erase him, that his truth would be only a whisper. And that was the real tragedy of Troy Donahue. Not just his fall, not just his struggles with drugs and money, but the burden of a heart that had never been allowed to beat freely. When we look back at Troy, we see more than a blonde prince of Hollywood. We see a man who carried within him both the sweetness and the sadness of a secret love. We see an artist destroyed not just by the changes of cinema, but by the cruel demands of living a life that is not his own. And we feel the weight of what could have been, had the world allowed him to be himself. So as you ponder his story, his rise, his secret loves, his pain, and his fall, ask yourself, do you see Troy Donahue as a cautionary tale or as a man we should celebrate for the courage he had to exist in silence? What does his struggle mean to you over the years, over the miles? And as you answer, we invite you to join us in preserving stories like this. By sharing this video, by subscribing, by joining our community, you ensure that these hidden stories will not be forgotten. Because remembering Troy Donahue isn't just remembering a star. It's remembering all the hearts that dared to love, even when the world rejected them. When the final curtain closes on the story of Troy Donahue, what remains is not simply the tale of a fallen movie star, but the portrait of a man who embodied both the promise and the peril of the American dream. He was handsome, charming, and admired by millions, a blonde prince of romance who seemed carved for the silver screen. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, no one could rival his blue-eyed perfection. A summer place made him an icon, and for a moment he represented everything Hollywood wanted the world to believe: youth, innocence, and love everlasting. But away from the spotlight, Donahue's life revealed the brutal truth of Hollywood's golden age, an industry that promised immortality but punished authenticity and discarded those who no longer fit the mold. Troy Donahue was more than just a poster on a teenager's bedroom wall. He was more than the dreamy leading man in Paris or Rome Adventure, or the heartbroken idol whose name filled fan magazines. Behind the image was a man fighting to survive in a system that demanded he hide his deepest truths. His stardom was carefully managed. Studios dictated who he dated, where he appeared, and how his story was told. And like so many stars of his era, he paid the price for fame by surrendering pieces of himself he could never reclaim. Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s was a machine, smooth, ruthless, and merciless. Actors were packaged like products, romances staged for publicity, every smile rehearsed, every article and photoplay or teen beat meticulously orchestrated. For those who strayed from the script, the consequences were devastating. Troy lived this contradiction daily. The golden boy adored by millions on screen, and the lonely man off-screen, forced to wear a mask. His beauty, his vulnerability, even his charm, everything filtered through an image the studios demanded. And as the cultural tides shifted in the late 1960s, when audiences craved anti-heroes and grittier stories, his clean-cut persona suddenly felt outdated. The offers slowed, the lights dimmed, and the idol began to fade. The fall was harsh. Troy battled alcoholism and financial ruin throughout the 1970s and 1980s. At times, he was homeless, living out of his car. A sobering reminder of how quickly Hollywood forgets its own. But his story did not end in despair. With quiet determination, he entered Alcoholics Anonymous, embraced sobriety, and began to rebuild. He returned to acting, not as the starry-eyed leading man of his youth, but in small television roles and cameo appearances. Most memorably, he reintroduced himself to audiences in John Waters' Crybaby, 1990, a tongue-in-cheek satire of the very teen idol era that had once made him famous. Donahue laughed at his past, and in doing so won back admiration, not for being perfect, but for being honest. When we watch Troy today, we see more than a handsome face frozen in time. We see a survivor. At fan conventions, he no longer appeared as the untouchable matinee idol, but as a humble man who greeted admirers with warmth, humor, and self-deprecating wit. Fans told him how his films had shaped their youth, and he listened with gratitude. He had stumbled, fallen, and risen again, not to reclaim lost glory, but to embrace humanity. His resilience, his candor about addiction, and his willingness to face fans as himself, rather than as a fantasy, made him beloved once more. And yet, his life remains both symbol and warning. Troy Donahue represented how Hollywood once defined masculinity, the all-American boy, admired by women and envied by men. But his decline showed the darker truth, how the same system that built him could just as easily cast him aside, leaving him with broken careers, broken hearts, and broken dreams. His story forces us to ask, what is the price of silence, of playing roles written not just for the screen but for life itself? He was proof that beauty does not shield from loneliness, and fame does not guarantee happiness. In 2001, after years of sobriety and steady recovery, Troy suffered 2 devastating heart attacks. Doctors attempted emergency surgery, but his body, already weakened by years of struggle, could not recover. On September 2, 2001, he died at the age of 65. His death closed the final chapter of a life that had outshone all others. Yet his story endures, not just because of the glory of his youth, but because of the courage he found in facing his demons, reclaiming his dignity, and surviving long enough to share his truth. So when we remember Troy Donahue, do we see only the blonde idol of a summer place? Or do we also see the man who overcame scandal, addiction, heartbreak, and reinvention, and emerged with humility and grace? Perhaps the answer lies in both. He was an icon of Hollywood's golden age, but also a man scarred by it. His life is more than a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that behind every poster, and every headline is a human being, fragile and flawed, struggling to be free. How do you see Troy Donahue? As a fallen idol of a bygone era, or as a man who demonstrated quiet courage simply by surviving? If his story touches your heart, if you believe these hidden truths deserve to be remembered, join us in preserving them. Share this story. Let the memory burn. Because Troy Donahue is more than just a face on the screen. He's a man whose journey reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows, and every whisper from Hollywood's past deserves to be heard. Troy Donahue was more than a Hollywood idol. He was a man who loved in silence and carried hidden scars. If his story moves you, share this video and subscribe, so his truth and legacy will never be forgotten.